Today's date is August the 20th, 2020. Time is 14:27 hours. My name is Herman Hall. I'm a detective with the Attorney General's Office, Department of Criminal Investigations. I'm at the Louisville office conducting an interview with, is it Sergeant or is it?
Yes, sir, Sergeant.
Okay, Sergeant Luke Phan. And present in the room is Assistant Attorney General Rewa Zakaria and Private Attorney Todd Lewis. If you would, state your name for the record.
Luke Phan,
And where are you employed?
the Louisville Metro Police Department.
How long have you been employed there?
14 years.
And during that 14 years, what capacity you served the Louisville Police Department?
Started as a patrolman, then a SWAT officer, then patrol sergeant, and now I'm a criminal interdiction detective sergeant.
The SWAT officer, what years were you a SWAT officer?
From 2011 to about present.
To the present time?
Yes.
So 9 years?
Yes.
Now that's SWAT. Is it a full-time?
It was. Well, actually, we have a full-time team or contingent, and then of course we have augmented officers, so full and part-time.
Okay. So when did you become a sergeant?
2017.
And what was your assignment after becoming a sergeant?
I was a patrol sergeant in the LMPD 2nd Division.
And your current position is what?
Is the criminal interdiction complaint response unit detective sergeant.
And how many people do you supervise in that unit?
About 6.
And who are they?
Well, currently is Cole Gibson, Detective Cole Gibson, Vincent Joseph Doherty, Richard Guido, Jared Hummer, was Brett Hankison, and then of course the recently retired Matthew Bauer.
So on March the 12th or March the 13th, did you have that same group of people?
Yes.
With, like you said, Hankison is no longer
Yes.
in the unit. Now, the reason that we're here, we're talking about the March 13 incident. Can you, in your own words, describe what led up to these search warrants? Do you know any of the details leading up to the?
No, sir. As far as details behind the investigation, no, that belongs to the place-based investigation unit. We were there simply that night to assist with the execution of multiple search warrants. One being on Springfield, where the incident took place, and of course 3 others were on Elliott Avenue. That's where we initially, my team and I, were initially assigned to, due to the, number of search warrants executed at the same time. We were tasked with assisting the SWAT team on Elliott Avenue to cover, the backside of the alley of 2 locations, in case anyone were to run or flee from the locations in the event of execution of the search warrant.
So did you attend the briefing?
I did.
Now, which briefing did you attend? I know there's 2. There was one at SWAT and there was one at CID.
At CID.
And who made your assignment?
I'm assuming Sergeant Kyle Meany. Again, my assignment was already on the board when I arrived.
And you said we. Who are we? You said you were assigned to the back alleys on Elliott?
Right. It was Detective Cole Gibson and Detective Vincent Joseph Doherty and I.
So 3 of you assigned to the back part.
And I believe there was another detective, McCauley. He was back there as well.
Now, who was conducting the briefing?
It was PBI, a place-based investigation unit. I believe it was Detective James and Detective Hannah. Well, Goodley.
So once you left the briefing, where did you go?
Went to Elliott Avenue again to my assignment to cover the alley where the SWAT team were to clear the two houses on that side of the street.
Okay. And once you got to Elliott, what happened?
When we got to Elliott, I believe the SWAT team had begun clearing the first address on Elliott. And again, forgive me if I don't remember the exact house number. They had cleared the first house on the south side of Elliott. Again, we were on the north side, preparing for them to clear the second house.
Can you remember about what time that was?
No, sir, roughly around midnight.
Okay.
But again, I mean, all this kind of... once they cleared the first house, they proceeded to the second. That's when one of my Detective Cole Gibson, prompted, or at least he heard an announcement over the radio that there was an officer-involved shooting in the 3rd Division. Again, when that was brought to my attention, I assumed it was a 3rd Division patrol officer involved in the shooting. I didn't think at the time it had anything to do with the other warrant. And then I asked him to clarify and say that officer-involved shooting, I believe an officer has been shot. And if I can recall correctly, I think he said, Detective Gibson said, Brett said that an officer's been involved.
Did you know which officer?
At that point, no. I mean, again, I'm still having to deal with all the issues on Elliott Avenue. I relayed that to the supervisor, SWAT sergeant on the Elliott side over the radio, our tactical channel. Pretty much said, hey, there's an officer-involved incident in the 3rd Division. And again, forgive me if I don't remember verbatim. I pretty much said, hey, we need to send a squad or send one of our armored vehicle there. And I put out the address.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
But who's the supervisor in charge on Elliott? Was that you?
Well, the supervisor overall operation. Well, again, you know, there's the SWAT side of the operation, and then there's
the operations.
Right, the operation. You know, full what it's worth, Sergeant Meany, who was the detective sergeant over place-based investigation, is the supervisor in charge of that operation up there. Again, we were just there to assist in the operation in its entirety, meaning assisting SWAT and assisting PBI.
But you instructed a SWAT
Right.
to go to that location,
Right.
requested them to go to that location.
Right.
Who'd you make that request through?
Well, again, I just kind of broadcast over our tactical channel. Sergeant Brandon Hogan, of course, he and I are on the SWAT team together. We have a working relationship,
And you mentioned radio. Were you monitoring a couple of different channels?
yeah. So there's the SWAT operation radio, because it's the sensitive nature of some of our SWAT operations. They have their own radio. I have access to that, of course, and then of course our TAC channel or our CID channel, which I had our other detectives monitor.
And that was Cole Gibson that was monitoring that?
Yes.
So he was in close proximity to you.
Yes.
And once you learned about the officer being shot, you made the request for SWAT. And what'd you do after that?
Again, you know, having to deal with all the movements on Elliott Avenue, whether we should proceed with the next 2 search warrants, or to just pretty much, you know, I say scrap it, but hold what we have and go deal with the issues on Springfield. And at this point, we realized the address was Springfield. I delegated a handful of bodies to stay in the alley again, just to kind of cordon off the 2 remaining locations, the remaining houses, and myself, Detective Gibson, and Detective Doherty headed south towards Springfield.
Now, did y'all take different vehicles? Or,
The three of us were in the same vehicle.
and did you make it to Springfield?
Yeah, I did.
And once you got to Springfield, what happened? What did you see?
Well, I pulled up actually right behind one of our SWAT armored vehicle, and of course, I was advised by one of the detectives that whomever he was, the shooter, came out or gave himself up.
And what'd you do after that?
Again, we still had the apartment cordoned off. I checked with other division personnel. At this point, the personnel from 3rd and 4th Division were there. They had the backside of the apartment, the building cordoned off. The SWAT team was moving up to the structure to the apartment to clear it. And of course, they cleared and they came out and they more or less hand over the scene to us.
How many police officers were there?
It's hard for me to, again, I remember a SWAT component was there, of course. The detectives that were there to execute the initial search warrants, and then officers from the 3rd and 4th Division. I would say roughly 20, 30. Again, I didn't get the opportunity to do a head count.
Sure. Did you find out what officers were involved in the shooting while you were there?
Initially, no. Initially, I assumed they had shot at us or at one of the officers. And of course, at this point, I realized talking to Detective Hankison that Sergeant Mattingly had been shot, and he's already been transported to the hospital.
And when did you learn that the other officers were involved?
Pretty much after I was told that Mattingly's been shot, that when I talked to Detective Cosgrove, he said he was next to Mattingly and he returned fire. So I realized, oh, hey, this guy's involved. I'm going to separate him because again, when I arrived, and even when the SWAT team was there to clear the structure, I didn't realize that Cosgrove was involved in the incident until he said he returned fire subsequent to Mattingly having been shot. So separated him, and again, I'm still trying to piece things together. Talked to Hankison, and he said he returned fire, and I was like, well, I'm going to separate you too. So I pretty much took him to the opposite corner of the parking lot next to a dumpster and made him stay there.
Did you give him a peer support?
Well, actually, and that's what it was. We were there for, of course, I can't give you a timeline how long I was there with him until peer support got there. Once they got there, I was relieved. I handed them over to peer support, and then.
Now, who was the peer support for Hankison?
I want to say it was Officer Michael Connor, but again, I know there were a few of them out there that night.
How about Cosgrove?
I don't recall. Again, he had a peer support officers with him.
Now, what are the roles of peer support?
Again, I'm not a peer support officer or peer support member, so I don't know if I can speak on the role of that unit or those personnel.
So the way that you're describing it, is there like designated people that can only be peer support?
Yes. They're actually on a team designated by the department.
Okay. So you don't know what the peer support members did with the assigned officers or anything at that point? You were still going through the confusion.
Right. Again, I simply didn't, I didn't know what they did with the two members. I really don't know.
Now, how long were you there on Springfield?
Several hours. Matter of fact, I was there till until PIU got there. So I would assume 3 hours they got there, and then once they got there, I was went down to the hospital to see Mattingly.
When you first arrived, did you know what apartment they were concentrating on?
Yes. One being that the SWAT personnel were already approaching the front door, and two, I believe it was Hankison that was behind cover, or behind a vehicle using it as cover, and he still had his gun positioned towards the apartment.
Now, when you say he had his gun, which gun?
His pistol.
Service revolver, or service
His pistol,
weapon?
yes.
Did you notice anything unusual about the apartment itself? Notice any bullet holes or?
Noticed a crack initially in the French door, balcony door.
Did you notice any other damage to the apartment?
Other than glass on the pavement or on a concrete patio.
Did you ever go inside the apartment while you were there?
No, I came through the door. I glanced by the door after the apartment's been cleared. Once the SWAT team actually handed over the scene to us to speak with the neighbor next door.
When did you learn that someone had died inside the apartment?
One of the SWAT member advised me that, and I will use verbatim. He said, "She is 1080."
And do you guys have someone that can actually? Is there an EMT or a paramedic assigned to that?
I believe the SWAT team that night did have an EMT assigned to the team.
And is that for rendering first aid?
Yes.
And you said you talked to the neighbors. Which neighbor did you talk to?
The first neighbor to the left of the door, white male gentleman. He came to the door initially when the detectives were knocking and announcing at the apartment. He actually came to the door thinking that they were knocking and announcing at his door. Once he got close enough to realize, oh, hey, they're not here for me, they're here for my neighbor, he kind of backed up a little bit and sat, and of course this is what he's telling me, he backed up a little bit and sat in his dining room. And then, a minute or a minute and a half later, however long it took, gunshots rang out, and then of course...
So a neighbor actually came to the door
That's right.
while the police officers were knocking and announcing.
Yes.
And what did they instruct him to do when he came to the door? Who told you that? Who told you?
The neighbor did. I actually spoke with the neighbor, and
Would that be Cody Etherton?
I believe it. Again, I should have done a better job taking this information down, but haven't realized that the scene is going to be handed over to our PIU, the investigating unit. I just kind of relied on them to
Were you wearing a body cam or any type
I
of
was
recording
not.
device?
I was not. I was actually with Detective Doherty when we both talked to the gentleman.
Detective Doherty?
Yeah, Vincent Joseph Doherty.
And I'm assuming you didn't get any type of written statement from
Again, I did not.
neighbors? Okay. And you say that the neighbor told you that the gunshots were just like a minute and a half later once he closed the door?
Yes, like I say, he you know, again, I should have been more specific. I you know, in hindsight, I should have done more than I did that night, but knowing that the investigation was going to be handed over to another unit, it wasn't necessarily my job at the time to interview or to even sequester this gentleman.
So it's customary for police officers, once they're on the scene of something and they respond, to either submit some type of supplement to a case report or give some type of interview related to that. Did you prepare any type of written supplement as to your conversation with the neighbor or your actions at the scene?
No, sir.
Did you give an interview to anyone on your actions, or
PIU, I did.
did PIU discuss your conversation with the neighbor at that point?
No, I don't recall, or not at length.
And I think during that interview with PIU, you made the comment, in hindsight, we should have analyzed more. And could you explain that comment?
Again, you know, I'm not a PIU investigator. You know, most of my career, I've been a narcotic detective of you know, of one form or fashion. I took for granted that they were going to interview all the witnesses after we hand over the scene to them. I didn't want my interview to even taint that investigation. And quite honestly, I don't think that's even protocol for us to interview a witness for PIU.
Okay. So after you left the scene, you say you went to the hospital. Well, let's back up a minute. When you were talking with Hankison at the scene, did he tell you that he was involved in the shooting?
Yes, I mean, once I learned that he was involved in the shooting, I separated him.
But did he tell you that?
Yes.
And did he give you any details on?
Now, other than he had thought that it sounded like machine gun fire coming from the house, and he returned fire. Again, it's not protocol for me to go any further when he makes a statement like that.
Yeah, and I guess what I'm asking is a spontaneous comment or statement that he made to you, and you just said it. He told you he thought it was machine gun fire, and is that when he told you that he fired his weapon? Did he tell you how many rounds he fired?
No.
And I want to ask you about Cosgrove. Did he tell you what he had heard or what he saw or any details?
Outside of what he told me initially about John, meaning Sergeant Manning, having been shot and he returned fire. Once he made that statement, I was pretty clear that it doesn't help for me to probe or pry anything out of him.
Okay. So when you walk by this apartment door, you say you walk by the apartment door.
Yes, sir.
And you actually talk to the neighbor. Were you able to look inside the apartment?
I was. The door was wide open.
And what did you see?
I saw a body at the end of the hallway, towards the back of the apartment.
Was the apartment well lit?
No, I mean I can't recall distinctly whether it was well lit or not. If I have to guess, someone could have turned the light on. I mean, again, in an incident like this, I can't put myself in place of a SWAT medic.
I'm not asking you.
Right, but you know what I mean. I would imagine they would have had the light on to render a better. But no, I mean, whether it was fully lit or partially lit, it's hard for me to recall that.
Okay. So you don't know if the apartment was lit when you walked by it or not. You just remember seeing
Well, I
it.
remember the breezeway, there was a light on.
How about the parking lot? Did you notice any lights on in the parking lot?
Again, I was out there for 2-3 hours. Subsequent to there were lights on, but I don't remember the particular placement of any of those street lamps or.
Okay.
Yeah, it was lit.
So you went to the hospital. What'd you do at the hospital?
Went to see. Well, I had a hard time trying to find the his room, but went to see Sergeant Mattingly.
So was he in a room at that time? You say?
Yes, he was already in a room. I think they were preparing him for surgery.
And did you just talk with him?
Yes.
And what did he tell you when you went in the room and talked with him?
To be honest with you, there were other people already with him. One being the chief of police, and I think the other one was assistant chief of police, Sheriff Parks, maybe. They were already in the middle of talking to him. I believe I was talking to someone, it's another detective there. I think either Josh Stone or someone else. But I didn't get to really talk to Sergeant Mattingly, but briefly. Pretty much say, I'm glad you're okay.
And how long did you stay at the hospital?
Maybe 10 minutes, if that.
And where'd you go after that?
I went back to the scene. This my two detectives that were with me initially was still there at the scene.
So you went back to Springfield Drive?
Yes.
And what'd you do once you returned?
We actually helped with maintaining the scene. I believe at that point when I got back there, the crime scene tape were already up, and we pretty much stayed on the backside of the parking lot, where the scene was, and again around 5 maybe in the morning, we were relieved by PIU.
And while you were there, did you talk to anyone?
I stayed there with again Sergeant Detective Doherty and Detective Gibson. I believe Detective Campbell, who was the eye on that warrant, was about to, go down to PIU for a statement. But other than that, I'm certain there were division personnel that were out there in the parking lot, but I don't recall having any conversation with them that was significant or.
How about neighbors? Did you talk to any of the neighbors or any bystanders?
Outside of talking to the gentleman, after talking to that gentleman, we actually went over to the neighbor from across the breezeway and knocked on the door. It took her a while to answer the door. She came to the door, and we pretty much asked her if she heard anything. She said no. I was in the back room. She heard some commotion, but she never came.
And get back to that neighbor. When you went inside the apartment, did you notice any damage to the apartment?
To her, no. And that was one. The first neighbor or the second neighbor?
Well, the first neighbor.
I noticed there was some damage to his wall. From what he told me, that a bullet went through, and then of course his balcony door glass is shattered, presumably from where a bullet had gone through.
How about the second neighbor?
Be quite honest with us, she wasn't very receptive to us talking to her.
Okay.
So.
And I'm going to back up a little bit and get back to the briefing in just a second, because I forgot to ask you about the matrix. Who came up with the matrix for those locations?
Who came up with the matrix? I believe it was PBI, Sergeant Meany's group.
And when you looked at the board, were all those search warrants no-knock warrants?
I knew that the 3 SWAT warrants on Elliott were no-knock warrants. If I have to be honest with you, I don't recall specifically, seeing the Springfield address as a no-knock warrant.
Okay.
Clearly, from all the coverage that has resulted of this, say there was a no-knock warrant. But no, I don't specifically recall from that night that it was a no-knock warrant.
Okay. Well, since the March the 13th incident, have you talked to Hankison about what went on?
He and I have talked. I mean, again, he works for me. He and I have talked. Since he was relieved or let go from the department, we've talked. But I've kind of refrained myself from talking about the incident because I knew stuff like this was going to happen. I just figured when we don't talk about it, I have to answer certain questions.
So has he given you any details about what happened that night?
Outside from pretty much what he told me and that night. I say we talk, but I just kind of refrain from asking or have him talk about it.
And after he was dismissed, you still keep in contact with him?
I'm certain I called him once or twice. But,
and what have you talked about during those phone conversations?
I guess ask him how he's gonna move on from all this, and I'm certain there are certain worries that he had. I guess more than anything, I try to be a friend and comfort him. But
what kind of worries does he have?
Clearly the backlash from all of this. His daughter who's having to change her life. Just a lot of things. As you can imagine, there's, he's worried about being able to go to the grocery store without being harmed.
Sure. How about Cosgrove? Have you spoken with him?
Yeah, I'm certain I've called him once or twice.
And have you discussed the details that happened that night?
No. Again, I just kind of refrain from.
And how about Mattingly? Have you talked with him?
I believe I called him once, and I spoke with him when he came to the division after he was released from the hospital, about a week or so later.
And did he give you any details about what went on that night? I think that's all I had.
Just have a couple questions. So you were interviewed by PIU before.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and they had asked you about the conversation that you had with Cosgrove.
Okay.
Because when you arrived at the scene on Springfield, Mattingly was already gone. Is that correct?
Yes, he was already transported.
Okay. So when you arrived and spoke with Cosgrove, what information did he tell you about what had just happened?
Aside from him telling me that I think the word was he was the number one or number two guy at the door. Mm-hmm. Told me that Manley had been shot. He was on the other side of the threshold of the door and returned fire where Manley went down. Mm-hmm. It's hard for me to recall a lot of the conversation because I probably played this scenario out through in my head hundreds of times, right? So I don't want to say it's convoluted, but what took place. It's kind of convoluted with what he told me. You know what I mean?
Right. I just want to know what he told you.
Yeah, it's
okay.
Yeah.
But he told you that Mattingly was the first one through the door.
Right.
And that he was after him. Is that right? Right. Okay.
Well, usually,
not usually, but what happened that night? What he told you happened.
Again, the reason I'm bringing this up is it's not so much that Manley was the first one through the door. And he was saying the way we train our officers to make entry into a door is one officer on one side, mm-hmm. the other officer on the other, so they have a cross coverage of whatever threshold we're going through.
Okay.
Right. So, and I say usually it's because that's how we train our officers. Mattingly went in, was followed by.
And this is what he told you.
Yes, and to be quite frank with you, you don't have a better account of what I said with PIU.
Right, that's why I'm
than what I can tell you now.
But do you remember? Did you have to ask him because did you have to ask him, did you shoot or were you involved, or did he volunteer that information to you?
I believe I must have asked him, because otherwise, because again, when I got there, I didn't realize, I had no idea that he was involved.
Okay. And then, did you speak with Hover? Is it Sergeant Hover?
Hoover.
Before you spoke with Hankison?
That I don't recall. I mean, no, because I got there and Hankison was the first one on scene that I saw from the unit.
Okay. And then did you have to ask him if he was involved in the shooting, or did he volunteer that? And if you don't remember, you don't remember.
Yeah, I don't remember. I'm certain he volunteered.
Okay.
Yeah. So, you have to realize, when I got there, I assumed that none of our officers actually fired shots. I assumed that Manley was the only one that got shot,
Okay.
But
you said Mike Campbell was out there. Do you remember having a conversation with him about what happened? Did you ask him what was going on? How they initiated the search warrant?
No.
Okay. Do you remember if Tony James was still out there?
I believe he was already gone. I believe he was in the EMS wagon with Manley, but I could be wrong on that.
And then what about Mike Noble? Do you remember him being out there?
Actually, I saw Nobles at the hospital, so I'm assuming he went to the hospital.
Did you talk to him at all about what happened out there?
Well, I spoke with Nobles after everything has kind of, I guess, cooled. I mean, like days later.
What did he tell you had happened?
Basically, say that he knocked, banged on that door, and I believe he said, because some of the guys were kind of giving him a hard time at the moment, that it took him too long to ram the door, and I believe he said he must have rammed it 3, maybe 4 times, and on the 4th time the door came open. Mm-hmm. And of course, Detective Nobles got out of the way after he had rammed that door, when Sergeant Manley made entry.
And then the neighbor was a white male that you
Yes.
spoke with?
Yes.
Do you remember speaking with a white female in that home as well?
He had indicated that she was in the bedroom. I believe I saw her for a brief moment, but she never came and spoke with me. I don't recall talking to her. Maybe someone else might have, but I don't recall.
You mentioned you train the officers for entries. So when is that training?
Usually on like the second Wednesday of every month. Now we have mandated training for our unit, our criminal interdiction unit, for every second Wednesday every month, and it's not always about entry. However, I try to train my guys, or at least some of the guys that have conducted search warrants with me, on entry, as on occasions that I can.
So were the officers that made the entry on Springfield, were they part of those trainings?
Cosgrove was. Again, it's usually when I conduct training within our division, I try to get as many of our officers to attend them, because again, we do a lot of search warrants, and we all need to be on the same page.
Do you have a sign-in sheet for those trainings?
We have sign-in sheet for the monthly training, but the ones I conducted, whether it's weekly or bi-weekly, no, I don't have a.
Well, I'm getting a little bit confused. The monthly training, who conducts those?
So the division will assign. Again, in our line of work, there's more than just warrant entry training, right? There's everything from I'll give you an example. Our asset forfeiture detectives or sergeant have conducted training on asset forfeiture procedures. So And I don't remember the specific date in which that was done, but they conducted that. Whereas, like last year, I had the SWAT team come out and train the entire division on warrant service and entry. And so, the SWAT team technically conducted that training, but I facilitated that. When I conduct training, when it comes to some of these warrant service, I do with my group and I do some of the others, called street platoon, so that they are more familiar with some of the techniques and some of the movements.
And you do that about every 2 weeks, you say?
Yeah, I try to, of course.
Is it customary for you guys to serve warrants that time of the day or not?
I wouldn't use the word customary. We serve warrants pretty much every hour of the day. There's no policy that barred us from executing or serving a search warrant late at night or too early in the morning. For us, it's usually when it is the safest for both parties, meaning the person the warrant's being served on, and of course the people serving the search warrants.
Okay.
So SWAT did a training last year
Yes, ma'am.
with the CID unit
Yes, ma'am.
on entry and search warrants.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Can you tell us when that was? Can you look that up? And give us that
I can look that up,
Okay.
but
Not right now, I
yeah.
understand that. And then about every month you do a training with all your men, different subjects.
Right.
Do you have that also documented?
We
where you can
should.
tell
We
us?
should have that in our
Okay.
division folder.
Can you look that up for us as well?
We can do that.
Okay. That's all the questions.
I don't have anything else. Do you want to tell me anything or make any comments that you feel you need to make or that might be important? Anything we forgot to ask you?
Nothing I could think of. Like I said, that was pretty comprehensive.
Mr. Lewis, do you have anything?
Since you all confirmed it for others, are you in possession of any records that include Sergeant Phan's home address or his phone number?
I'm not aware of any.
You don't even have any? Okay. Yeah, obviously, if that becomes an issue, that's an issue for us. So that has been my purpose in representing these witnesses. Doesn't sound like that's an issue for him, but I will continue to represent him. But please just assume that I do.
Okay. All righty. That concludes this recording at 15:10 out.